Welcome. I'm Deborah Crone, Chair of Academic Programs and Professor of Cultural History at the Bard Graduate Center, where we study the complex ways in which decorative arts, design, and material culture mediate our own relationships with the past. Our graduate students, faculty, and research fellows do this work cognizant of our own location in time and space. We're situated in 3 landmark buildings on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, in the heart of Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral territories of the Lenni Lenape people. We're 1 block away from the former site of Seneca Village, a community of African American and immigrant property owners that was forcibly relocated to create Central Park, in a neighborhood and a city long comprised of global migrants and refugees from war, violence, and economic dislocation. This evening, it's my pleasure to introduce the 18th annual Paul and Irene Hollister Lectures on Glass that honor the pioneering work of critic and contemporary studio glass historian Paul Hollister and his wife, Irene Hollister, who is a philanthropist, an advocate for glass scholarship, and the founding administrator of the Association for Computing Machinery. We're especially pleased this evening to have with us Beth Carver and Sheila Barron Smithie. Beth is curator emerita at the American wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where for 20 years she oversaw the collections of American silver, jewelry, and metalwork. She came to the Met from the Clark Institute in Williamstown, where she was curator of decorative arts. Her publications include English, Irish, and Scottish silver at the Sterling and Francine Clark Art Institute from 1997, and Early American Silver in the Metropolitan Museum of Art from 2013. Beth holds degrees in art history from Smith College and from the Williams Graduate Program in the History of Art. She's also an alumna of the Addingham Summer School in Royal Collection Studies and is currently president of the board of the American Friends of Addingham. She also sits on the advisory boards of the Association for the Study of Jewelry and Related Arts and the Silver Society in England. Beth was one of 6 organizing curators of the 2018-19 exhibition Jewelry, the Body Transformed, as well as a contributor to its catalog. Her exhibition Jewelry for America was on view at the Met from 2019 to 2021. Sheila has worked as a specialist in historic and vintage jewelry for over 25 years, researching, cataloging, and appraising for auction houses and galleries. A graduate of Harvard University, she's a fellow of the Gemmological Association of Great Britain and the recipient of its 2005 Christie's Prize. As an adjunct faculty member at Sotheby's Institute of Art in New York, she designed and taught the master's level course, Gems and Jewelry, History and Markets. From 2013, she consulted on jewelry for the Metropolitan Museum of Art, helping to research the institution-wide collection for the 2018 exhibition, Jewelry, the Body Transformed, which Beth also was a curator of. So, before becoming a jewelry specialist, she worked as a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs & Co., where her areas were investment banking, commodities and equity research, sales, and trading in New York, Mexico City, and London. And I think the people laughing might be our students, perhaps. I don't know. This evening, our speakers will address the New York firm Marcus & Co., which created exceptional jewelry for the art-loving, wealthy elite in New York during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Co-authors of the new book, Marcus & Co., 3 Generations of New York Jewelers, they'll look at the turn of the century work, especially highlighting the firm's body of extraordinary Plique-à-jour enamel jewelry. So please join me in welcoming first Beth and then Sheila to the podium this evening.
Deborah, thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to have you all here. We didn't expect a full house, so this is very exciting. And Sheila and I are delighted to share with you some of the research we did on the New York firm of Marcus & Company. Our book, on view here, will take you through 3 generations of the firm's history, but this evening, as Deborah said, we will focus on the most productive and creative period from the mid-1890s to the mid 19 teens under the dynamic leadership of the family's and firm's second generation. It was during that time that they embarked on their travels through India, participated in the landmark arts and crafts exhibitions in Boston, and made annual visits to Europe, where they came under the spell of such luminaries as Lalique, Colonna, and Vever, leading to their own highly original response to the Art Nouveau style, including plique-à-jour jewelry and plique-à-jour enameling, as represented by the extraordinary jewel on the right of the screen, about which Sheila will now tell you.
When this Marcus Morning Glory found itself on the auction block in 2011, it was a jewelry world sensation. The word was that no American firm had ever reached such heights in the enamelage art. And it was so vividly colorful. As you can see, it's so sculptural. It even moves in your hand like a natural flower. And so interest really revived in this long shuttered Fifth Avenue firm. Marcus had always been sort of romantic, mysterious, both storied and obscure. And its history had actually been saved from total oblivion in 2007 by a jewelry historian, Janet Zapata. She was a former Tiffany archivist. But the sudden appearance of this long lost flower had raised so many more questions. Who was the jewelry genius at Marcus who had brought it into being? Who made it where? How could we find out with the brand long dead? And way back in the 90s, when I started as a jewelry specialist at an auction house, I remember occasionally getting Marcus jewelry to catalog and so original and different, and thinking, yeah, too bad there'll never be a book. And then I met Beth. So the Morning Glory did have this amazing, glamorous provenance for us to explore. The jewel had been a gift from one woman to another. Of a corsage that would never die. The recipient was Ada Rehan, she was an Irish immigrant who rose in the New York theater world to become this international celebrity, someone that an artist, Oscar Wilde himself, called a brilliant and fascinating genius. And the giver was the art patron Catherine Whitten. She was a woman of wealth and taste. She had hired Louis Tiffany as her interior designer. And Whitten was this Ada superfan of the period. She had commissioned Sargent to paint her portrait, which hangs in the Met. And we found the Morning Glory was not the first gift of fabulous jewelry to Ada. In fact, Whitten had been a Marcus client since the 1890s, and according to correspondence, she had considered buying a, quote, unusual Indian necklace of jargoons and diamonds for her idol. And this was one of the moments where Beth and I began to realize there's a lot to discover about this firm's history of artistic achievement in jewelry design.
We should mention that, I don't know if we've mentioned this yet, that fabulous Morning Glory brooch is on view at the Newark Art Museum, very close by, so do go see it. All right. Let's rewind briefly for a quick potted history, beginning with the founder, Hermann Marcus, who was born in Kassel, Germany in December of 1828. At the age of 14, he moved to Dresden to train under the court jeweler Moritz Ellemeyer, whose shop was located at 1 Judenhof in the historic center of Dresden. This apprenticeship would have been an ideal position for a young man eager to join the jewelry world because Ellemeyer served many prestigious roles, including court jeweler to the Royal Saxon Court and royal court jeweler to the Queen of England, Queen Victoria. It was also in Dresden that Hermann became infatuated with a spirited young Scottish schoolteacher named Margaret Elder, who would later become his wife. And we decided to leave it to you to read all about their romantic story in the first chapter of the book, and how they both happened to emigrate to the United States around 1850. Herman's first professional job in the United States was at Tiffany Young and Ellis, founded in 1837 by Charles L. Tiffany and John B. Young as a, quote, stationery and fancy goods emporium. They had recently returned from Paris, with a large stock of important diamonds and jewelry that had been shaken loose from French aristocrats fleeing the 1848 revolution. So imagine what it was like for Herman to have this spectacular inventory with which to work. And he quickly became a diamond expert, as well as a lifelong friend of Charles Tiffany. We have letters showing they kept in touch through their lives. In 1855, Herman jumped ship to join Tiffany's main competitor, Ball Black and Company. And in 1863, he partnered with the jeweler Theodore B. Starr, a visionary businessman with whom, as Starr and Marcus, they exhibited successfully at the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial. After their partnership dissolved in 1877, Herman returned to work for Charles Tiffany, eventually joining the firm of Jacques and Marcus, established by his son William and the jeweler George Jacques. Then, upon Jacques' withdrawal in 1892, Marcus and Company was finally established, its principals being Herman Marcus and his sons William and George. There, I've just raced you through the first 40 years of Marcus and Company history in order to reach the second generation, which will be our focus this evening. And here I would like to introduce the remarkable archive of design drawings that was so very critical to our study. In 2013, we first became aware of 8 volumes of drawings housed at the Rauner Special Collections Library at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. And there we were delighted to discover thousands of small-scale drawings executed on cardstock in watercolor, pen and ink, or graphite, and arranged by type into large leather-bound albums. Scattered throughout the drawings are informative notes regarding the choice of materials, dimensions, and construction details for the craftsman to follow. And very occasionally there is a date or the name of a client, not often enough. Happily, with the assistance of the Watson Library at the Metropolitan Museum, I was able to persuade the Rauner Library to digitize the entire archive, which you can view free of charge on their website. You can also get to them on the Met's website. Before long, we realized that the set of albums at Dartmouth was incomplete, and with the help of generous colleagues, we learned that 14 additional volumes were preserved at the Morse Museum in Winter Park, Florida. Those volumes had been donated by a member of the family's third generation, William Elder Marcus Jr., who wintered in Winter Park and who had become friends with the Morse Museum's director, Hugh McCain. The annotations are rather haphazard, but gradually we began to recognize certain patterns that allowed us to bring order out of chaos. Most of the drawings bear lettered and numbered stock and special order codes, for which the original key has unfortunately been lost, but we've created a new one. We realize that the letters relate to the different forms. For instance, R stands for rings, L for lockets, while the numbers provide a sequence within the categories. And from occasional dated notations and from information available in exhibitions and advertisements, it was possible to apply an approximate chronology to the sequences. Based on recent examination, it appears that the O that precedes many of the letter codes, stands for original or our, designs that were made for stock. But each of the volumes also includes designs whose numbers are preceded by what appears to be the Greek letter lambda, signifying a bespoke or special design.
And the specialist behind these special designs was Herman's son, George. Like many of the firm's clients, Whitten would have been drawn to this outgoing, dynamic personality. He was reported to come out from behind the counter and draw, original designs for clients when they came in. He was, to borrow a phrase from Ben Macklow, an aesthetic omnivore. And George and his family made a very extensive trip, unusual trip to India in 1895, as Beth will detail, and it strongly marked his imagination. So George's deft artistic work, you see from this group of designs, it has this distinctive blue-gray shadowing falling to the right on these and many Indian-inspired designs dating from the 1890s onward. And more indication that the Marcus family was really working on the leading edge of jewelry design in New York comes from the archives of wealthy families, such as the Wades of Western Union. They were these sort of daring and voracious art collectors who scoured the world's great metropolises. And judging from Wade's detailed little shopping notebooks, they furnished like a full-on Aladdin's cave at Marcus in the 1880s and 90s that included numerous jewels of Indian origin, as well as over 3 dozen diamonds, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, some of them cut in the Indian taste, as well as natural pearls from Agra, the Mughal capital of pearl trading. And in addition, they bought 2 Lalique items from Marcus in 1893, a jeweled vinaigrette, and in 95, a gold figural jewel. And this was still a few years before Lalique was being celebrated as the first artist to work in the medium of jewelry. So putting both the Wades and the Marcuses quite kind of ahead of the curve in taste and having an eye for emerging jewelry talent. So to be clear, before I show these, we do not know exactly what the Wades purchases looked like, if only we had his iPhone. But here is a selection of objects that share similarities with his verbal description. So, and the last, actually, by Lalique, coming from Wade descendants to auction just a few months ago. And of course, the Rockefellers were 3 generational clients of Marcus, buying Colombian emeralds, Burmese rubies, and sapphires. They were top clients along with Gilded Age families like the Goulds, the Woolworths, the Flaglers, the Vanderbilts. And their archives contain this very detailed back and forth, dating from the early 1880s onward with all the generations. But our favorite part of all our research might be Abby Rockefeller's invoices with bill to be sent to father on them, the way jewelry shopping should be.
The founding of Marcus and Company occurred just before the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, and the White City, as it was called, spanned some 630 acres of fairgrounds, featuring 46 participating nations. The grounds were spectacularly illuminated at night by innovations in alternating current electricity of Nikola Tesla, illustrated in this evocative image of Columbia presiding over the many modern marvels. And among the 200 display pavilions or buildings was a pavilion showcasing Indian culture and artifacts, including jewelry made of gold, silver, and other materials. Regrettably, the exposition was overshadowed by the worldwide financial panic of 1893. And while Tiffany and Company still succeeded in exhibiting, Marcus and most of the other American jewelers had to cancel their plans to participate. In doing so, they missed out on the visit of Henri Vever, who had been appointed by his government to the exhibition commission. However, Vever's 1894 report chronicles his own visits to a number of prestigious American firms in San Francisco and New York, including Marcus and Company, whose work he praised as, quote, often very remarkable. High praise from a Frenchman, I should say. Undeterred by having to miss the World's Fair, William and George continued to undertake buying trips abroad, and surviving documents enable us to track their journeys. For instance, on their return trip on May 27, 1893, the arriving passenger and crew list records that they carried with them an impressive 18 pieces of baggage, suggesting to us that they were importing a large array of luxury goods. In 1895, Herman joined his sons on a momentous trip to India. He renewed his passport on December 22, 1894, then met William in London to witness his son's passport renewal with the stated intention of, quote, traveling around the world. And we love these applications. They record so much information, including physical descriptions of the 65-year-old Herman and the 37-year-old William, who at 5'6" towered over his 5'3" white-haired father. But they also, very helpful to us, illustrate each man's handwritten signature. Joined by George, the trio traveled to Jaipur, Madras, Nepal, Kashmir, and Tibet. Along the way, they assembled a substantial collection of jewelry and traditional Indian gems, including antique carved emeralds and ruby beads, as well as Indian clothing and other works of art. And these travels through India, which so inspired the firm's future jewelry designs, were quite a revelation to us, since they had not previously been acknowledged in understanding Marcus & Company's work, which had routinely been labeled simply historical revival style or Art Nouveau. So this was a major, an important discovery. Yet, with a new appreciation of what was clearly guiding many of George's designs, one need only look at the early drawings to see how much Indian influence dominated their work in those early years. And also, as Sheila noted in the Ada Whitten story, Indian jewelry was of great interest to New Yorkers at that time. Equally important to the collecting were the long-lasting business connections they made with Indian jewelers and suppliers. And one of their clients was the textile magnate and art collector M.C.D. Borden, called the Calico King, who purchased several significant carved emeralds from Marcus & Company, including this 387-carat Mughal carved emerald set with a diamond and mounted in carved gold. And this jewel was said to have belonged to the Maharaja of Benares, who is pictured at the center, with an emerald on his bazuban, or armlet. This type of Indian goldwork inspired what Marcus & Company called their Hindu style, characterized by swirling fluid lines. And here is a wonderful example. It's a leaf-carved Indian emerald inlaid in the Kundan style with irregularly faceted diamonds backed with foils and mounted into Marcus's Hindu gold frame, which is also set with European cut diamonds and pearls. And I'm pointing out in the middle slide the so-called octopus arm motifs that appear on much of the goldwork of this period, both front and reverse. Always look at the reverse of a Marcus jewel. Within the 5 volumes of ring designs preserved at the Morse Museum, we found some 30 examples in the Hindu style. And we're showing you one here that exhibits the firm's characteristic chasing of the gold, with beading, stippling, and circular punching. And don't miss the interior on the far right. The interior flourishes George designed purely for the private enjoyment of the client. The viewer wouldn't see it. And the small diamond placed on the back of the shank, which is typical of the little surprises Marcus jewelry often features. Comparison with the design drawing allows you to see how closely the finished jewel followed the original conception. This drawing displays the type of information we were able to harvest through careful study of these drawings. The numeral at the lower left, 15865, preceded by a Greek lambda, indicates that this was a special order. The monogram HLM, inscribed on a separate piece of card glued to the top of the drawing, is enameled inside the shank, which of course we also can't see. And the pencil D & Co. tells us that the ring was manufactured by Durand & Co. of Newark, New Jersey, one of Marcus's frequent collaborators, using Marcus's design. On the topic of collaborators, I will simply mention tonight that there were many who played important roles at Marcus & Company, whether as manufacturers to Marcus Designs or as designers, jewelers, or sales representatives who worked for the firm. This is only some of them. And suffice it to say that the craft and the trade was, as it continues to be today, composed of many interconnected parts. For almost all the jewelry brands you know, it always takes a village. It was never the work of one individual. And we thought it was really important to delve into these stories, which are detailed in much more, with much more information within the pages of the book. In 1897, George responded to the call of Boston Society of Arts and Crafts, whose first exhibition took place in April of that year. Comprising some 400 exhibits by over 100 exhibitors, the show aligned with Marcus and Company's dedication to creating artistic jewelry. This was a refrain that they stated repeatedly over their 50 years in business. An advanced review of the exhibition in the Boston Herald speculated that the most popular displays would be, quote, the Marcus exhibit of 49 examples of solid gold and precious stones, representing the highest attainment in the jeweler's craft in America. Another review noted, quote, a familiarity with the Hindu, Persian, Egyptian, or Pompeian goldwork discloses that ancient models have served as inspiration, which of course was true. Showing you here an image from the 1899 exhibition illustrating 50 pieces of jewelry and objects that Marcus and Company displayed, crowded into this roll-top desk that was modified with glass shelving. As reported in the Boston Herald, their display consisted of, quote, masterpieces of workmanship in gold carving and jewel setting from designs by Mr. George Elder Marcus, the foremost artist in his craft in the United States. We know a few of the objects that were in the exhibition, and this one appears on the checklist for the 1897 exhibition. Stunning brooch, and of course another example of Hindu carved gold, set with pearls and diamonds and with an emerald pendant. Once again, the gold work illustrates the distinctive surface treatment we identify with Marcus and Company, including the intensive chasing on the reverse. And this detail also shows you one of their marks, M & Co. By the way, at the back of the book, you will be able to see illustrations of many of their marks. Marcus designs did not strictly copy Indian jewelry, but their use of the carved emeralds, emerald cabochons, and beads that they had purchased in India, as well as the chased gold, is wholly sympathetic to work such as the 19th century Deccan puddock, or pendant, on the left. These include the splendid emerald and diamond pendant on the far right, and in the center, one of our favorites, that centers an alexandrite rather than an emerald. Its design recalls the traditional Indian peacock motif. The large alexandrite chrysoberyl is set within a scrolled surround of diamonds and green enamel. And the image on the right actually shows the same piece twice, revealing the stone's color change phenomenon, depending on whether the light source is natural or artificial. This phenomenon is discussed in a small booklet produced by Jacques and Marcus in 1882 called Something About Neglected Gems, where they introduce readers to, quote, this most mysterious and fascinating gem, which changes its whole aspect when taken from daylight into the presence of a lighted candle or gas jet. And in addition to the signatures of both Durand and Company and Marcus and Company on the drawing, indicating their collaboration, the various production numbers suggest that this design was used several times. And then on the right, there is a suggestion for an alternate pearl drop, should the client prefer that variation. As Sheila mentioned, George would come out and help you, design what you wanted to purchase. Another ravishing object exhibited in the 1897 Arts and Crafts exhibition is this Chinese snuff bottle of rutilated quartz, a gemstone that contains small needles of titanium oxide, giving it the appearance of silver threads. Marcus added a gem-set jade top with beautifully chased gold, including the finger ring from which the wearer could suspend the bottle for easy access. There are a number of these in the book, these Chinese snuff bottles. Rarely can we identify the provenance of most Marcus and Company jewelry, with the exception of Ada Rehan, but this spectacular pendant brooch, a special order, descended in the prominent Gould family of New York. It consists of a large Australian boulder opal with a fiery pink phenomenon, enhanced by the substantial framing of its ironstone host rock. It is surrounded with bright green Champ-Levé enamel, and diamonds with delicate prongs of scrolling Hindu gold. The choice of bolder opals with all their imperfections, such as the random dark ironstone stripe across the drop at the bottom, reflects the arts and crafts preference for the imperfect, which Marcus and Company also embraced. And opals, another of the so-called neglected gems, would become one of Marcus and Company's favorite gemstones. In fact, William Marcus Jr., third generation, reported that in 1908 he had purchased the entire year's output of black opals from the Lightning Ridge mine in New South Wales, Australia. That acquisition inspired a brief new push in advertising by the firm, at times repositioning opals as good luck stones since they were sometimes considered unlucky. This stunning example of an Indian inspired ring centers a large black opal, the chase mount enameled in shades of blue and green and highlighted by diamonds. And as the advertisement suggests, quote, "It is impossible to keep the eyes from straying to the hand that holds this pulsating mass of color." It's a stunner. Now, not all carved emeralds were worked into Indian-inspired designs. Beginning in the late 1890s, another popular Marcus and Company style was one that George termed antique. This is quite a loose term, because it encompassed motifs reminiscent of almost any distant time. But inspiration seems to have been drawn largely from Sumerian, Babylonian, Assyrian, and Mayan art and artifacts, reflecting current archaeological activity. We illustrate a number of antique style jewels in the book, but I'm showing you just this one here, a really bold, elaborate special order necklace with knotted links, melon carved in Indian emerald beads, and irregularly shaped plaques accented by granules, rivets, and fields of green chandelvet enamel. Another of our favorites. The arts of Asia also inspired George's designs in the early 20th century. And this extraordinary example, actually one of the earliest surviving jewels to exhibit Marcus's foray into the use of plique-à-jour, about which Sheila will speak a great deal more, is this dragon-themed special order belt buckle, which is now fitted as a pendant. Fashioned in red and gold and yellow gold, heavily chased to depict the creature's scales and claws, this gem-devouring dragon with demantoid garnet eyes is backed by glowing plique-à-jour enamel wings and set with natural zircons chosen for their high brilliance and dispersion. The S-curve of the dragon's neck and the coils of its long, sinuous body relate to the distinctive imperial dragon emblematic of the Tang dynasty. And here again, George's deft hand rendered this drawing almost as beautiful as the final object. Despite their success at the 1899 Boston Society of Arts and Crafts exhibition, the firm's celebratory mood was dampened 6 months later when Herman Marcus died on the 18th of October. His death occurred just months after the firm had moved uptown to 544 Fifth Avenue and 45th Street, one of several moves during its lifetime. And of course, they were following clients to their new uptown mansions, as you know from the Gilded Age, right? All right, now it's Sheila's turn.
So during this period of transformation and huge wealth creation in New York, there were extraordinary personalities who influenced art and taste, and one of these was Siegfried Bing, that gifted entrepreneur who founded the Parisian gallery Art Nouveau. He was also called an evangelical connoisseur, and he certainly was in his love for Japanese art. It's one of the reasons the Art Nouveau is so infused with its principles and techniques, and you'll see that entered into the jewelry too. Before Paris, Mr. Japanese Art, as he was called, was really in that New York mix, as was his jewelry designer, Edouard Colonna, who had worked briefly for Louis Tiffany. Bing's salon at 220 Fifth Avenue in the 1880s was just a few minutes' walk from the Marcus store in Union Square. So we're not sure they were besties, but they were all former neighbors. And looking to Paris, the Marcus design books really show that they closely followed Vever, that Parisian jeweler who had visited them in 1893, as well as from afar his close colleague Lalique. And they would have studied the Art Nouveau offerings, of course, at the consequential 1900 exposition, where Lalique and Vever had these very exciting adjacent premises. In Lalique's remarkable booth, you can kind of make out those famous bronze butterfly women guarding the jewels under a little baldacchino of bats flying among stars, just so fabulous. And both booths were packed with original jewels of delicacy, of bravura and imagination. Now, certain defining jewels exhibited in Paris were not destined to appear in the Marcus Fifth Avenue show windows. Probably wisely, know your customer. But this sensational work was being collected by the French avant garde as the jewelry of ideas. It explored new realms in psychology, including this concept of the dark unconscious, expressed there in Lalique's insect women, and Vever's apparitions brooch as well on the right. And note the discipline, though, of this jewelry's muted palette and this strong stylization. And you could really say that Lalique here is using this new sort of ethereal, intangible medium of plique-à-jour enamel as a way of dematerializing his jewels in favor of uplifting and forefronting the ideas behind them. And from this photo, we can actually see what was on display in Vever's booth. So it was more botanical, naturalistic jewelry. Note that chrysanthemum in the lower right with the plique leaves, one blossom facing backwards. There's a comb, a thistle comb in the upper right there of plique as well. A fern tiara in the upper left, dragonflies. So rather than those dark dreamscapes and disturbing transformations that very few Americans would have been able to stomach, much less wear to Mrs. Astor's drawing room. These jewels really expressed this exuberant naturalism that appealed to our Marcus friends. That, by the way, is friendly Mr. Vever on the left. And Marcus, so they took up this new style very cautiously at first in creating this lovely, if more conventional chrysanthemum jewel on the right. However, after this modest homage was just the beginning, because in a quantum leap, Ada's Morning Glory appeared in Marcus's Fifth Avenue windows in 1906. So it's clear if you look to see that ongoing influence of Vever in these two, that botanical precision. Recall. One chrysanthemum was turned backward, as is the blue Morning Glory here, and also in those stylized stems with the whiplash curves at the top. So still looking at Vever, but the Marcus flower also has this extra 3D quality that relates it to an early poppy by Lalique. If you can see on the right from the front and the side. And at the same time, the Morning Glory's Technicolor hues set it apart from both the French jewelers, making it sort of a little more American in its taste and sensibility, perhaps. But overall, this dramatic performance that was in enamel that was just right for an actress like Ada Rehan. And it did attract a lot of attention in those windows. In January of 1906, a writer for Town and Country precisely described this, quote, poetic jewel, noting that backward blue blossom and how it was drawing inconvenient crowds. And the journalist reported it was just one of many such flowers. It was one of a little horticultural show. He goes on to express all this amazement and give all these descriptions, and you're thinking, the door is right there. Surely he's going to go in and find out, but nope. So as the young people say, you had one job. So, this was this missed opportunity, but it really did create a lot of interesting work for Beth and me. So, So just to keep you in a little suspense before showing you more Marcus flowers, let's pause to explain as best we can what is Plique-à-jour enamel. And if it looks like little miniature stained glass windows in some senses, that's true. It's, of course, enamel is a form of glass applied to metal. It's an ancient art that can be traced back at least to the Minoans. While this challenging subspecialty of backless enamel or plique emerged as a really distinct practice in the Renaissance, as described by Cellini. And there's no single recipe for enamel, but the basic formula from antiquity was like a frit or powder made of quartz sand, an alkali flux, and lime with metallic oxides and chlorides for coloring. So in the lower left, just for a little visual, you can see a workman busy crushing and washing these materials to make a wet paste. And in the center, we have a contemporary jewel by Tom Herman and Patsy Croft. Tom, are you in the back there? I think he is, yes. Actually, it's inspired by the Morning Glory when he saw it at the Newark Museum. Just to, again, give you that quick visual of the steps on how the forms are raised from gold sheet. And then the botanical patterns are sawed out of the leaves and petals. And on the right, there is Tom laying the enamel in with a teeny tiny spatula and setting it by vibrating the mount. So amazingly, it's capillary action caused by molecular cohesion and surface tension and other physics expert methods that I can't describe, holding the liquid in place until it can be fired. Here's the enamel again for a little visual, undergoing multiple applications, firing in what's called a muffle furnace. Lalique had one in his workshop. And this kind of specialized oven, it's isolated from the off-gassing of the fuel, so that doesn't, contaminate your work. And it permits this very precise temperature control. So they're working between 700 and 800 degrees Celsius, 1450 Fahrenheit or so. And here are some French enamelists in the period with their working in their ovens around 1900, busy at different techniques, different enamel techniques. And so as you can imagine with all these steps, plique is this very high loss, time-consuming, daring technique that very few ateliers in Paris would dare to attempt on a regular basis. So to answer, how was that morning glory raised? Because your eye really scans the jewel, just like wondering, and the jewel is like fighting back to keep its secrets. But I have to credit our friend Tom with emphasizing to us this distinctive hand, quote unquote, you see working on those Marcus flowers. It's not just one genius enamelist, it's a whole team of specialists, all very accustomed to collaborating over months to create these. And so again, if you recall from the last slide, those blossoms were hammered and raised from gold sheet. The stems would be forged, and then they would be put together with those sepals, for example, acting as bolts to screw parts together. And then the stems would be connected via limited range hinges that would be invisible from the front. And you can see some of them a little bit there. And they're what give that feel of natural movement. Because if you think of a flower, right, a stem will only bend so much before you reach a resistance and then it snaps. That's what these hinges do. And then the pieces would all be dismantled again. Another craftsman would saw pierce the leaves and petals according to the species cell patterning. And then yet another would polish, that would take a long time. And then yet another would polish the gold. And next, the enamelist would be laying in the colors, somehow what Tom was doing, somehow achieving those gradations in the cells with this incredible control, firing the parts again and again in those little ovens. Somehow without accident. And then even after that, the flowers might receive surfacing treatment. So you see how the flower is like a satin finish, whereas on the back of the leaves it's glossy. So after all that was complete, then the parts could be reassembled either in Paris, or Marcus could do it in New York. They were very capable of that. So finally, now that you guys are all up to speed, ready to try this at home, here are some more. This is the Marcus Plique hazelnut, possibly inspired by Lalique's hazelnut jewels that came around this time, very much with his tender sensibility, I feel, for nature. The Marcus's different materials, of course, from the horn and the real nuts of the Laliques, but there are no gems. It's just a few scraps of gold and some glass, some very special glass. Otherwise, zero intrinsic value, right? That's often the criticism aimed at jewelry, that when we try to persuade people it's art, and Lalique and Marcus were very aware of that. So this too has this 3D freshness and fragility, as though just snapped from the tree. Again, note the botanical precision, this finely serrated edges, that incomparable repoussé and saw work, and the enamel just gently shading within the cells from various greens to rose. It's more dramatic and virtuoso in the coloring than what Lalique and Vever were doing. And another just spectacular detail before we move on, these two additional types of enamel. So that opalescent on the nuts themselves, it's not because it's out of focus. Your eye just, you can't even fix on where the surface begins. And the curling nut housings, they have that streaky, multi-layered enamel that remind me so much of the Lalique's Sphinx moth that was on display at the Macklow Gallery. Work again with no equivalent in American jewelry. Now, Americans were employing Plique very artfully. For example, Louis Tiffany, now in charge of his dad's firm, was an artist and jeweler in his own right, a frequent exhibitor in Paris. He used it in his jewelry, but with restraint, with subtlety, with delicacy, no ostentatious showmanship, and that very disciplined palette. So in the book, we looked at, well, maybe European workshops produced these designs for Marcus. Here, for you to look at some contemporary examples by Tourette for Fouquet on the left, Wolfers, that amazing orchid, on the right, and then the great enamelist Tesmar. But if you look at the Plique, the detail in the top right, it's definitely a different technique. You know, if you give geniuses something to accomplish, they get there by different roads sometimes. And just to zoom in even more, the Marcus, much like the Lalique, in the attenuation of the materials, accomplishing so much volume, so much color with so little, and exceeding Tourette really in the artful gradations of color achieved. And just can't help returning to the parallels with Lalique's highly three-dimensional, just picked poppy, that ingenious construction where those central elements are invisibly holding all the petals, the stamens together. And that tension of the way it strikes your mind, it's otherworldly, yet it's also hyper-realistic. And yet that contrast with Lalique's restraint of palette that makes the Morning Glory perhaps more American in its enthusiasm. And then yet another Marcus flower is this Technicolor orchid you just caught a glimpse of before. Those 3D qualities, the amazing control of the color. The conch pearls are representing buds, and they're suspended from these little flexible diamond tendrils. And I feel like there's a little wink all the way out of history from that designer where the orchid's top petal is wrapping itself around the diamond vine. It's like a concession that, okay, the diamond vine is artificial. Yes, we put that there. But the orchid, no, that's just growing there. That's totally organic.
I'm showing you here the Met sweet pea brooch, likewise bejeweled with diamond veined leaves and pink conch shell pearls that represent the budding blossoms of the plant. And we both marvel over and over again at how the flowers are so often created with areas of tightly layered, unfurling petals pinned together to create the complexity and three-dimensionality of actual botanical specimens. You know it's a jewel, but they're really quite extraordinary. This example is marked on the back of an upper stem with an applied signature plaque, which would have been less damaging to the jewel than trying to stamp the mark. The various flower brooches represent plant species popular at the time, such as fuchsia on the left and the geranium on the right. And these jewels were always fitted with both a pin stem to wear as a brooch and a ring through which a chain could be inserted to wear as a necklace, although how anybody wore any of these is quite a good question. A more streamlined approach to plique-à-jour, along with the sinuous lines of Art Nouveau, is represented by a group of jewels dating from 1906 to 1908. And this 18-karat gold festoon necklace features a restrained palette of pale blue aquamarines with plique-à-jour in a matching hue. Where's Nani for you, aquamarines? And then the related ring, which is also quite beautiful, displays the monochrome hues and centers an elongated step-cut aquamarine set amid fields of conforming plique.
And judging by the many popular Marcus Iris jewels from this period that we just weren't able to get to, George would have known in person or in literature surely this expressive masterpiece from Lalique's 1897 Salon display. He's drawing here not only on his observations of nature, but also very much Japanese artistic principles like asymmetry and freedom from convention in the plant's textured gold leaves that are forming self-framing links and irregular negative spaces, but also the imperfection where the blossom on the left is shown and discolored, even dying. They're in different life stages. There's this theme of transience, so important in Japanese art. They're shown tumbling in a moment in wind against opal water, the orange flashes sort of suggesting a sunset scene and evoking a whole little landscape at a fleeting moment in your mind. I mean, there was never a bracelet like this. It was one of a group, including that plique poppy that we've been looking at, that inspired Gellé's comment that Lalique had prepared the way for the modern bijou. And this Marcus Iris, we feel, really expresses many of those same qualities, evoking the evanescent in nature, creating that little habitat in your mind with the rippling blossoms at their height, and while the leaves already yellow and droop. So there's this poetic theme here of the temporality. It's so well developed, it really makes it one of those jewels of ideas. And then there's that Marcus combination of unusual size, sculptural quality, color gradation, and then that seamless kind of secret construction that makes it appear like an organic whole, like it just grew there when we know it to be of many separate parts that put together so painstakingly. It all relates it firmly to the other Marcus Plique masterpieces, and it's really no wonder that Catherine Whiddon, who was so drawn to the avant-garde, understood the Marcus Morning Glory and selected it for an artist like Rehan. So in the end, Indian jewelry did continue to inspire Marcus design throughout the late teens, 20s, 30s, really until they closed in 1942. From carved emeralds to historic jewelry forms and motifs from Mughal and Hindu art. And though the Art Nouveau, which was, of course, that short-lived yet impactful international movement, it had long passed, Marcus returned to flowers a generation later in the 1930s, and I can't help imagining the family thinking back to that time when the public just was thronging their Fifth Avenue sidewalk, just spellbound by this garden of glass and gold in their windows, and when a patron of the arts chose a Marcus jewel to honor one of the great actors of the 19th century. And thank you all for listening.
We have time for some questions, and we already have one right here.
So one of you talked about genius. I think your scholarship is genius. So thank you. Bravo. I'm not a jewelry expert, so a very simple question and then perhaps more nuanced one. You talked early on about the cut of an Indian jewel versus other jewels. So I'm not a jewelry expert, so what is that? And the second question is, how did some people gravitate to Marcus versus maybe Tiffany in the States or Lalique in Europe? Thanks so much.
Remind me of your Indian emerald question.
Just what is a
The
different
table
cut
cuts.
of
Yeah, historically, the Indians have been cutting gems for thousands of years and extremely artfully and knowing a lot about the technology. And we just simply value different things in the West, brilliance and sparkle and all that. Indian cutters explored all kinds of different aspects of diamonds that are special, to diamonds. Portrait diamonds that I think you might be referring to in Beth's slide in the Padak. They enjoyed these diamonds that you could sort of see through. You actually can't see through them very well because they bend the light so hard. But they play with a lot of optical qualities that are more varied than we look at in Western cutting, I would say. And they were also, I think, what I've heard is they were could be a bit wasteful with diamonds in that they had so many of them. So they only, the most perfect ones were most beloved and most, prized. And that's why a lot of people feel that Golconda diamonds have something very special to them. So.
Your question about how people chose to shop at Marcus, I don't think we know the answer to that, but we can say that based on the Rockefeller archives, they were buying from many different jewelers. I mean, nobody was, only wedded to Marcus that we know of. But I think, Marcus's last location was on Fifth Avenue between Tiffany and Cartier. So, you didn't have to walk far to, to visit all of them.
And I think to some degree it was like a question of personality and luck. Herman was very outgoing, and his son George particularly friendly, outgoing. Rushing out behind the counter to try to help people realize the jewelry of their dreams. I mean, imagine walking into Cartier today and expecting that kind of attention. Where's my designer? So.
Great. Any other questions? Oh, up here in the front.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, they themselves did or did not actually do the designing, and were they, any of the family, actually did the work? In other words, did the goldsmithing or the cutting or putting it together, or was it that they farmed out that part of it? I don't know.
Yeah,
How
we'll
else to
both
put
answer a little bit. We think it was a mix, always, even from the beginning. We don't think Herman trained on the bench. We think he was always more front of house and business and buying gems and kind of somebody who looked to be maybe a tastemaker
Learning
more.
about diamonds, he was a diamond expert.
Right, he was a gem expert, as was his son William. But George, was lucky; he got an artist. His seconds was an artist, and when I got a tip from a wonderful student who said, "You've got to go down to the surrogate court and see what you can find down there." And we dug out all kinds of papers, thousands of pages. One of which William was, because George died very early, said, I can hire a jeweler, but I can never hire another designer. Their business really suffered without him. So it was a very organic form of success, I guess.
And they both had training. I mean, they both,
Yes.
had training as jewelers. But the quantity of work they were doing, and just for practical purposes, using companies like Durand, like we didn't even mention William Shear, but some of the people on that slide I showed you, they were. They were manufacturers. I mean, they also did some designing. It's very complicated, but yes, they were doing all of the above. Yeah.
Yeah, and like Lalique, who had that muff oven and probably did some of his own enameling, Marcus did some jewelry making in house, definitely until maybe the 1920s, teens. Even then, a little bit, but they would be going back and forth and actually, standing over the jeweler, the bench jeweler, and being like, I don't like those elevations, or there would be back and forth. It wouldn't just be like, here it is. They'd be supervising carefully.
And there are documents that survive that say that their premises were fitted for manufacturing, so we know they could do it there.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you. Would you mind passing this down?
Hi, I'm awed with the bracelet with the opal, and that he brought up all the years worth from Lightning Ridge. I spent some time mining opal, but in another area. And opal is unlucky because it's not a good stone; it cracks. And I was wondering, did you actually see this bracelet?
Yes, you can see the Lalique bracelet at the Macklow Gallery on 57th and
Yeah, I mean, I
Barron.
can't believe that it would survive without cracks.
Some opal is destined to crack, and don't you think it's particularly the Honduran opals and so on, but we're not looking at those. But I feel like some have, if you the Smithsonian told us, Jeff Post told us, they regularly soak them in water. They don't let them sit to dry out because if there's the potential for them to crack, they will.
I mean,
this can help.
they were formed underwater.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. No,
They're hydrous. They're hydrous silica.
Gorgeous, gorgeous piece.
Yeah, you should. It's what the Smithsonian does. So we all can
Any other questions?
be
Yes. Thank you.
confident. That's worth
Hi,
doing.
thank you really very much for this. I have a double question. First, having just had many Sargent shows in New York, Boston, Chicago, now in Paris, do we ever see this jewelry in painting of these elegant women?
Marjorie Merriweather Post.
Okay, there you go.
But yeah, we looked a lot. What you can find, and it's not what you're asking, in Vogue and Harper's Bazaar and other magazines in the 20s and 30s, they were well enough known that there would be photographs by people like Steichen and Horst P. Horst, and the ads will say, dressed by Chanel, Marcus Jewels. So you see them advertised, people wearing them, but they're not people we know. Right.
Have us back to do the 20s.
Yes. Then I had one more part. Looking at these in drawings, seeing their beauty, their color, the delicacy of them, it reminds me very much of Charles René Mackintosh's watercolors of flowers. Does that have any interplay?
I know that we know that they were looking to study botany from the early 1890s, and they must have been informed by all the art, as you mentioned, and the publications. There were a lot of women botanists in the U.S. who were doing beautiful artwork. So, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
We have a question back here.
Yeah, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. All of the flowers and the vines look so delicate. I'm just wondering how they have survived so well.
Well, we mourn for the ones that didn't, because yes, they. Beth, do you
I was
want
going to
to?
say, we're showing you the survivors. We don't know about the others.
Yeah, there was a whole horticultural show, and there aren't many left. Because it is terribly fragile, and if you're wearing one of those necklaces and you were to be dancing on a tabletop, that
I have to say, tonight has been such a gift, but the gift is not over. It keeps coming because Maclo Gallery has generously come to share some pieces of Plique that they have in their collection. So in a moment, we are going to thank our incredible presenters. But first, I want to encourage you to go up, see the pieces, also get the book. It's fantastic. And follow this project because it really is wonderful. Please join me in thanking our speakers.